The key was cold and heavy in Alara's hand, an unwelcome weight that seemed to pull her entire arm toward the earth. It was tarnished, ornate, and utterly out of place against the sleek, minimalist key fob to her old life that still shared her key ring. This new archaic piece of metal was her entire inheritance from a great uncle she had met exactly once. A fleeting memory of a tall, bearded man who smelled of pipe smoke and gave her a curiously warm river stone before vanishing back into the periphery of her family's history. Now he was gone, and he had left her everything. A crumbling Victorian monstrosity known as Whispering Pines, and, according to the solicitor's painfully formal letter, its repository of unique curiosities. To Alara, standing in the damp air of a late autumn afternoon, it looked less like a repository and more like a mausoleum. The house was a symphony of neglect. Peeling paint curled away from the clapboard siding like dead skin. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle as if sighing under the weight of decades. The windows were dark, dusty eyes, and a single shutter hung from one hinge, tapping a irregular, mournful rhythm against the wall in the breeze. It was the last place in the world she wanted to be, which was, perversely, why she was here. After the dual collapses of her career and her relationship, the prospect of disappearing into a place that already seemed forgotten held a certain bleak appeal. The key turned in the lock with a screech of protesting metal that echoed through the stillness within. The door swung inward, releasing a breath of stale air, dust, and the faint, sweet scent of decaying paper. Alara stepped over the threshold, her suitcase a lonely sentinel on the porch behind her. The grand hallway was a canyon of shadows, the little light that filtered through the grimy windows illuminating swirling motes of dust, and it was full. Not with furniture arranged for living, but with things. Piles of them. Shelves bowed under the weight of mismatched china and tarnished silver. Stacks of books formed precarious towers on the floor. A glass-fronted cabinet was crammed with a legion of tiny porcelain animals, all staring out with identical blank eyes. She moved further in, her footsteps hushed by a thick carpet of dust. The sitting room to her left was worse. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, their contents spilling out yellowed maps, collections of feathers, a basket of rusty keys. It was chaos. It was hoarding. It was the physical manifestation of a mind that could not let go, and it threatened to smother her. A wave of claustrophobia tightened her chest. How could she possibly sort through this? It would be easier, saner, to just walk away, call the first estate liquidator she could find, and be done with it. In the study, she found a semblance of order. A massive oak desk stood clear of debris, and on its polished surface lay a single sheet of paper, weighed down by a smooth gray river stone that felt familiar in her hand. The note was written in a spidery, elegant script. "Alara," it began, "I have spent a lifetime gathering what the world has carelessly left behind. A dropped token, a misplaced letter, a forgotten toy. These are not merely objects. They are vessels. Every one has a story, a silent echo of a life lived. Do not see clutter. See a library of lost moments. Your task, should you choose to accept it, is not to curate, but to return them." Alara let out a short, bitter laugh. The ramblings of an eccentric old man. She was about to crumple the note when her gaze fell upon a small, delicate object beside the stone. It was a porcelain thimble, painted with tiny, faded forget-me-nots. Without thinking, she reached out and picked it up. It was cool against her skin, and then it wasn't. A sudden, vivid image flashed behind her eyes, not a memory of her own, but someone else's. A young woman with chestnut hair, laughing, her head bent over a piece of vibrant emerald silk. Sunlight streaming through a window to catch the dust motes dancing around her. A feeling warm and golden, of profound contentment, of being exactly where one was meant to be, flooded through Alara. It was so intense, so real, that she gasped and dropped the thimble as if it had burned her. It clattered onto the desk, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. The image was gone. The feeling was gone. But the echo of it remained, a ghost in the room. And in her mind, the thimble lay where it had fallen, a small, white circle against the dark wood of the desk. The warmth and the laughter had vanished, leaving only the musty silence of the house. Alara stared at it, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She flexed her fingers, half expecting to see them glowing or changed. What had that been? A hallucination brought on by stress and the lingering grief she'd carried with her like a second suitcase? It felt more real than any dream, more vivid than any memory of her own from last week. The sensation of the sun on her skin, the specific texture of the silk had been like slipping into a life that wasn't hers. For a long time, she didn't move. She stood, a statue in the gloom, arguing with herself. It was nothing. A trick of the mind. You're exhausted, you're emotionally raw, and this place is getting to you. But the rationalization felt thin, a flimsy curtain trying to block out a blinding light. The feeling of that woman's contentment had been so pure, so unburdened, it had left an ache in her, a longing for something she hadn't known she was missing. Cautiously, her hand trembling slightly, she reached out again. Her fingertips brushed the cool porcelain. This time, sensation was softer. Not a violent flash, but a gentle immersion. The image of the woman, Eleanor, the name surfaced in her mind, like a bubble from deep water, turned. She felt the faint pressure of the fabric against her finger, the rhythm of the needle pushing through, and beneath the contentment, a new emotion surfaced, a thread of bittersweet longing tied to a man. A name accompanied it, Thomas. The echo wasn't just a picture. It was a feeling. Complex chord of emotion that resonated deep within her, driven by a compulsion she could no longer deny. Alara began to search. Her uncle's note about a library of lost moments no longer seemed like a metaphor. This was a mystery, a tangible thread to pull, and it was infinitely more engaging than the bleak landscape of her own thoughts. She turned to the piles of paper that crowded the study. If this thimble was a vessel for a woman named Eleanor, perhaps her story was here, buried in this archive of the abandoned. The work was slow and dizzying. She opened boxes filled with ledgers recording weather patterns from the 1950s, bundles of receipts for hardware long since rusted away, and stacks of newspapers with headlines announcing wars and weddings. The sheer volume was overwhelming, a sea of paper threatening to drown her nascent quest. But she persisted, her focus narrowing to a single name. Eleanor. Eleanor. She whispered it like a mantra, sifting through the ephemera of decades. And then she found it. Not in a formal document, but tucked inside a slim volume of poetry. It was a birthday card, its edges softened with age. The illustration on the front was a simple bouquet of forget-me-nots. Her pulse quickened. Inside, in a strong masculine hand, was written, "To my dearest Eleanor, may your day be as bright as your smile. I am counting the hours until I see you again. All my love, Thomas." The date was June 12th, 1947. The connection was electric. The thimble's echo swelled in response to the card. The longing she had felt crystallizing around this man, this Thomas. It was proof. She wasn't going mad. The objects were alive with memory, using the faded postmark on the envelope and the town's name. She spent the next day in the local library, scouring digitized census records and old town directories. She found an Eleanor Miller who had lived on Oak Lane, a mere 10-minute walk from Whispering Pines. The record showed she had never married. Her profession was listed as seamstress. She had lived in the same house her entire life and had passed away 20 years ago. Alara sat back, the pieces clicking into place. The emerald silk, the skilled hands, the name it all fit. She had held a fragment of this woman's joy in her hand. And with that realization came a new, undeniable sense of purpose. She couldn't just leave the thimble in a drawer. Eleanor's echo deserved to be quieted. It needed to go home. Expand Chapter 3 in 600 words. No add heading. Dub. Decision felt both absurd and utterly necessary. The logical part of Alara's brain, the part that had crafted business proposals and managed spreadsheets, scoffed at the idea. She was going to a cemetery to return a thimble to a woman who had been dead for 20 years. It was a fool's errand, a symptom of her unraveling sanity. But the other part of her, the part that had felt the warm sun of a 1947 afternoon and the quiet joy of a woman named Eleanor, knew there was no other choice. The thimble, now wrapped in a soft cloth and tucked into her pocket, felt less like an object and more like a responsibility. It was a story without an ending, and she was its reluctant scribe. The walk to the cemetery was quiet, the autumn air crisp and carrying the scent of wood smoke. The graveyard was an old one, dotted with weathered headstones and ancient sprawling oaks. Finding Eleanor Miller's grave was easier than she expected. The records had given her a plot number. The headstone was simple and modest, much like the image she had received of the woman. Asterisk Eleanor Miller, beloved daughter and friend, 1922 to 2002. Asterisk. Seeing the dates carved in granite made the entire endeavor feel even more futile. What was she doing here? She stood awkwardly, the cloth-wrapped thimble in her hand, unsure of the protocol for returning a lost echo to the dead. Visiting Eleanor? The voice, gentle and raspy with age, came from behind her. Ilara turned to see an elderly woman, her back slightly stooped, tending to a fresh bouquet of chrysanthemums on a neighboring grave. She had a kind, wrinkled face and eyes that held a quiet warmth. In a way, Ilara stammered, feeling caught. "I'm Ilara. My uncle was Alistair from Whispering Pines." A spark of recognition lit the woman's eyes. "Alistair!" Of course. A peculiar man, but a good soul. Always poking around, asking questions about old things. "I'm Agnes." She nodded toward Eleanor's headstone. She was a dear friend. The best seamstress in the county. She made my wedding dress, you know. Silk taffeta. I felt like a princess. The connection was so immediate, it stole Ilara's breath. I think I have something that belonged to her." She unfolded the cloth, revealing the porcelain thimble. The forget-me-nots seemed to brighten in the pale sunlight. Agnes's hand flew to her chest. Goodness me. Her lucky thimble. Psst. Her voice was a whisper of wonder. She talked about losing that for years. She was convinced it was a bad omen. She lost it just before she was meant to mend a very expensive gown for the mayor's wife. She was in a state, poor thing. Said her hands felt clumsy without it. The final piece of the story slid into place. The echo of anxiety she had felt beneath the contentment it wasn't just about Thomas. It was about this. The loss of a tool, a talisman. Ilara felt a surge of validation. What should I do with it? Agnes pointed a gnarled finger toward a small, weathered stone angel kneeling at the foot of Eleanor's grave. Its hands were cupped together as if in prayer or offering. "There," she said softly. "She would like that. It can keep her company." Feeling a sense of ceremony, Ilara stepped forward and placed the thimble gently into the angel's stone hands. It fit perfectly. As she let her fingers leave the porcelain, a profound and palpable wave of peace washed over her. It was not her own feeling, but something that settled onto the very air around the grave, a quiet final sigh. The lingering hum of the thimble's echo, the subtle pressure she hadn't even fully registered until it was gone, simply vanished. It was replaced by a deep, resonant silence. Agnes smiled, a knowing look in her eyes, and gave a small, approving nod before returning to her flowers. Ilara stood for a long moment, watching the light play on the white porcelain. She hadn't just returned an object. She had laid a ghost to rest. And in doing so, she had quieted a small, restless part of herself. The silence in Whispering Pines was different now. Before, it had been heavy and oppressive, a blanket of dust and neglect. Now, it was a listening silence, a library's hush, filled with the potential of countless unread stories. Ilara returned from the cemetery not with a sense of an ending, but a beginning. The thimble had been a key, not just to Eleanor's story, but to the house's true purpose. Her uncle's words, which she had once dismissed as rambling, now felt like a sacred charge. Do not see clutter. See a library of lost moments? And so she began to read. She started systematically, room by room, shelf by shelf. The chaos that had once overwhelmed her began to resolve into a heartbreaking order. It was not organized by date or type, but by emotion, by the intensity of the echo each object held. A tarnished silver pocket watch, when she held it, filled her with a cold, gripping anxiety, a man's panic, the sight of a train pulling away, the crushing weight of a missed opportunity. He had been late, and it had cost him everything. A child's wooden duck, its paint faded from bathwater, carried a simple, pure sorrow, the devastating loss of a beloved companion, the empty space in the tub where it should have floated. A single, jet-beaded earring whispered of a glamorous party. The scent of perfume and champagne, and the sharp, metallic taste of a bitter argument that had ended with it being torn off and flung. Into the night, Elara became a detective of the heart. She learned to quiet her own mind, to become a blank page upon which these ghostly impressions could write themselves. She would sit for hours at her uncle's desk, an object in her hand, letting the feelings and fragmented images wash over her. A name, a place, a date, any anchor she could find. Then the real work began. She cross-referenced these clues with her uncle's vast, disorganized archives. She pored over old town directories, scanned microfiche of local newspapers in the library, and tracked down family trees in online databases. She was no longer just Elara. She was a historian, a psychologist, and a finder of lost things. She found the grandson of the man with the pocket watch, now an elderly gentleman himself, living in a retirement home 2 towns over. When she mailed him the watch with a brief, careful letter explaining nothing of the echoes, only that it had been found among her late uncle's effects, she received a tearful phone call. His grandfather had never stopped talking about the day he was late for his own wedding, how he'd lost his father's watch in the mad dash to the station. It was the family's great what-if. For the wooden duck, she found that the little boy was now a grown man with a daughter of his own. She arranged to leave it on his doorstep with a note. He posted a picture of it days later on a community page. A bewildered and joyful post about a piece of his childhood miraculously returned. With each return, she felt a small, significant click, as if a misplaced piece of the universe had been gently guided back into its proper place. The whispers in the house did not diminish, but they changed. The pleading notes softened into anticipation. They knew she was listening. She started a new ledger, just like her uncle's old one. In it, she did not just list the objects, but their stories, the echo she had felt, the clues she had followed, and the resolution of their return. The pages began to fill, a growing testament to closure, a chronicle of a town's lost and found heart. The house was no longer a tomb of dead things, but a vibrant, living crossroads where lost moments finally found their way home. The work became her rhythm. The crisp turn of a ledger page, the soft whisper of dust as she lifted a forgotten object, the sudden vivid flood of a stranger's memory, these were the textures of her new life. The sprawling, eccentric house was no longer a refuge from her past, but a purposeful present. She had mastered the art of quieting her own mind to listen to the echoes. And the satisfaction of resolving each story was a balm she had never known she needed. Yet a small, persistent part of her remained untouched. A locked room within her own heart, where her own losses, the career, the relationship, the person she used to be, were stored away. She was so busy returning pieces of others that she never considered she might have left fragments of herself behind. It was during a final, thorough clearing of the attic, a space she had deliberately saved for last, that she found it. Tucked beneath the eaves, behind a trunk of moth-eaten woolen coats, was a small, beautifully carved wooden box. It was unlike any other container in the house. It was polished and personal, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw her own name elegantly carved on the lid. Elara, with trembling fingers. She lifted it. It was locked, but the key was tucked underneath, a tiny brass thing. The lock turned with a soft, precise click. Inside, there was no echo of a stranger. Instead, she found the quiet, familiar ghosts of her own youth. There was the clumsily woven friendship bracelet she had lost at summer camp when she was 10, a loss that had felt world-ending at the time. There was the pressed flower from a corsage from her first formal dance, its petals fragile and brown. And at the bottom, a ticket stub from the concert where she had first met Mark, the man she had almost married. A sharp, personal pang, entirely her own, shot through her. This was not her uncle's collection of lost things. It was hers. My dear Alara, the most difficult things to find are often the parts of ourselves we leave behind in the rush to become who we are expected to be. I gathered the world's lost things, but I also gathered yours over the years, knowing that one day you would need to find your way back to the curious, resilient girl you were before the world told you who you had to be. Do not be afraid of these memories. They are not anchors holding you back, but foundations. Welcome home. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of profound understanding. She picked up the friendship bracelet, and instead of the old sting of social failure, she felt the fierce, uncomplicated joy of a summer sun on her shoulders. The concert stub no longer symbolized an ending, but the thrilling, hopeful beginning it had once been. Her uncle had not just been a keeper of lost things. He had been a keeper of her. She closed the box, holding it to her chest. Looking out from the attic window at the quiet, familiar town, she no longer saw a place to hide. She saw a place to belong. She was no longer just the keeper of lost things. She was whole.